Al Franken is here. He is a two-term senator from Minnesota. Before entering politics, he was a comedy writer and performer on SNL. He also hosted a progressive radio talk show on Air America. He has recently emerged as a forceful challenger of the Trump administration. His tough questioning of cabinet nominees during confirmation hearings went viral.
If there is any evidence that anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign communicated with the Russian government in the course of this campaign, what will you do?
Senator Franken, I'm not aware of any of those activities. I have been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians.
I think if I'm understanding your question correctly around proficiency, I would also correlate it to competency and mastery, so that each student is measured according to the advancement that they're making in each subject area.
Well, that's growth. That's not proficiency. So in other words, the growth they're making is in growth. The proficiency is an arbitrary standard.
If they've reached a level, the proficiency is if they've reached a third grade level for reading, et cetera.
No, I'm talking about the debate between proficiency and growth.
Yes.
And what your thoughts are on them. Governor, thank you so much for coming into my office. Did you enjoy meeting me?
I hope you were as much fun on that dais as you were on your couch.
Well...
May I rephrase that, sir?
Please. 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 Oh, my Lord.
There it is, skill unleashed. Karen Tumblety of the Washington Post wrote, "At the dawn of a presidency," that would be the Trump presidency, "that stretches the limits of late-night parody, and at a moment when an out-of-power Democratic Party is trying to find its voice, the former comedian and satirist may be having a breakout moment as a political star." He's out with a new book. It's a memoir called Al Franken, Giant of the Senate. I'm pleased to have Senator Al Franken back at this table. Welcome.
Thanks, Charlie. Great to be here. I hope I'm as much fun behind this table as I was on that couch with Rick Perry.
Well, I did notice, when Rick Perry campaigned in this time and he wore the glasses, people said he was trying to look differently, but obviously the glasses have continued.
I found him actually very prepared for our meeting. He he knew my stance on energy issues. And I found him actually to be, he's the longest governor in history of Texas, and they did a lot of wind energy.
And very popular down there.
And very popular, and brought a lot of wind. I think Texas is the largest wind electricity producing state. And so I didn't vote for him because I didn't like some of his answers on climate, but I called him to tell him I wasn't voting for him, and we said, well, let's get dinner, and I liked
You had dinner with him?
I did not have dinner. We said, let's get dinner. That doesn't mean we're going to have dinner. We just said, well, I hope to do that. I hope to do that, and hope, I asked him to become a student of climate. And so I think it'll take a few months to do that. So
well, we might need that because there are reports, and seem to be more and more evident, that the president will, although he has not announced it, withdraw from the Paris Climate Agreement.
I think that would be a big tragedy in terms of our leadership in the world. This is something that 195 other countries signed on to. Every country in the world, I believe, but Syria and Nicaragua. We should be, the whole world knows this is happening. We met I went to Paris.
The global warming is happening.
Yes, right. Yes, the climate change is happening, and that if we don't address this, and if we address it, we're going to create so many jobs in renewable energy, and we want to be a leader in that because I want to be selling that technology to China instead of them selling it to us. They're choking on their fumes over there. This is an opportunity. Wind and solar have become cheaper than coal. This is something we have to do, and the costs of not doing it are so tremendous.
Alternatives are becoming much cheaper.
Yes.
And certainly cheaper than coal.
Yes, and natural gas,
and
of course,
natural gas.
has replaced coal. So these coal jobs
But not fossil fuel.
Well, there's fossil fuel for driving cars, et cetera, like that. I think that will change. But China is like if you produce cars in China or ship cars to China, a certain percentage of them have to be electric. They're spending hundreds of billions of dollars on energy technology, on research. We should be doing that. And in this latest budget that the president offered, we see cuts in that research.
Well, EPA is run by a man who said that he wanted to dismantle it.
I know.
He was an enemy of EPA.
Pruitt is awful, and they're dismantling the scientific review boards there. They're getting rid of the scientists and replacing them with industry-friendly scientists. This is a disaster, and I'm fighting as hard as I can. I write in the book that I have 3 grandchildren now, and I don't want them in 50 years to say to me, Grandpa,
why didn't you do more?
You were a senator. You knew climate change was happening. Why didn't you do more? And also, why are you still alive? Because I'd be 116 then.
They would ask that too, wouldn't they?
They would say, what are you doing alive? And I'd say, it's all the money we invested in NIH.
Our first question, Papa, is why are you alive? And our second question is, way back when was it? 2017, you had a chance to do something and you didn't do it.
Yeah, well, I'm fighting as hard as I can, and I blame the Koch brothers. Siegfried and Roy Koch, as you know.
But there's a lot of blame to go around, is there not?
Yeah, but the Republican Party, John McCain in 2008 was for putting a price on carbon.
Right.
And we can't get our Republican colleagues now to acknowledge climate change and to do something about it because they're afraid of being primaried by someone from the right that the Koch brothers will put $10, $20 million behind. And so this is making it very... And I know there's a debate going on in the Trump administration, right. And I don't know why today we had an early announcement early in the morning and why this is being drawn out, and I hope that the news we've heard isn't true.
When you look at what it says about America's leadership, if you withdraw, and what it means for China emerging as a global leader, not just a country that's interested in getting its own house in order, how do you see that playing out?
Again, I see it just in terms of jobs, just in terms of the investment in this technology that we need to deploy. And I don't know what happens after this administration. I'm hoping that we have an administration that understands that 97% of climate scientists, 100% of those who've been peer-reviewed, say this is happening. And no one knows this better than the Defense Department. And in their quadrennial review, they keep saying this is an enormous threat to us, and that when sea level keeps rising, we are going to have millions of climate refugees. And if you think what happened in Syria, which in no small part was caused by drought, if that that'll look like nothing compared to what we're going to see. So we see the Defense Department doing some of the best stuff in energy efficiency and in renewable energy, making algal jet fuel, et cetera, et cetera.
There is going on in Washington a series of probes into whether there was any connection between Russia and the Trump campaign team or the Trump administration. Have you seen any evidence of collusion so far?
We have a special prosecutor now, and I'm glad you showed the Sessions testimony. That was not true. He had met with Kislyak a couple of times, and so that was under oath, and he told me something that wasn't true. And he answered a different question than I asked, by the way. I asked him, would he recuse himself? And he answered that way. I think he did a pivot. Right. And
explain to everybody what a pivot is, because you talk about that as one of the things you learned when you came to the Senate. Or
a pivot is this. When I was running in 2008, I had a really hard time doing that because you'd ask me a question, I'd answer the question.
No, let's take an example.
Yeah, but I'll give you an example. Right. Someone would say, you're 20 points behind Norm Coleman. Why do you think that you have a chance of getting elected? I would answer the question, but the right thing to do is pivot and go like, Minnesotans don't care about polls. What I hear when I talk to Minnesotans, they care about how their kids are educated, that they don't go bankrupt if they get sick. That's what that's your pivot. So he pivoted from I recused myself to I didn't meet with the Russians. And a lot of people have given me a lot of credit because then he had to recuse himself when it came out he met with the Russians. And after Comey went, then Rosenstein was in the position to appoint Mueller, who's the right guy.
Attorney General.
So everyone, not everyone, a lot of people have given me credit, and I like to take it, but it's as if, that Franken, he's playing three-dimensional chess, and he's 4 moves ahead of everybody else.
Yes.
He knew that Sessions would pivot and lie, and that's what he was...
He trapped him, didn't he?
Yes. Okay. Yeah, that's exactly what was happening.
I intended to trap
that's what happened.
Future Attorney General.
Yes.
Yeah. But you said to David Letterman, by the way, how was the conversation between you and David Letterman at the 92nd Street? Why?
Wow, it was great.
Wow.
He's good at interviewing people.
Yeah. He is.
Yes.
And we saw that 25 years.
Yes. There's a reason for that. And he's also, he and I are good friends, and we had fun. We had fun for an hour or so at the 92nd Street.
So I sent for a transcript, and we couldn't get one yet, but there's news accounts of what happened. One of the things you said was talking about the Russian probes. Mm-hmm. There's got to be, they're going through a whole lot of stuff here if they have nothing to hide.
That's right. They do not, they're not acting like people who have nothing to hide. And so when you ask me, do I have any evidence, I think there's all kinds of circumstantial evidence. We have a special prosecutor. We have to follow the facts where they go, and he will determine whether there is evidence of, whether cooperation. But it's hard to believe that Jared Kushner has this meeting with Sislyak in the Trump Tower and forgets that he had it.
And even Michael Flynn was there.
And Michael Flynn was there, and that he doesn't report it when he's filing his disclosure.
Security thing.
Security clearance. You don't forget that. And and it's sort of hard to believe that he's talking about setting up communications within the Russians' communication system, hidden from our own intelligence. That's what he evidently thought. Yeah, without him telling his father-in-law. So, we may get to a point where it's, what did the president know, and when did his son-in-law tell him?
Paraphrasing the famous question from Howard Baker during the Watergate session.
Yes.
What did the president know, and when did he know it?
I think that was it. Yeah.
I think so, too. What do you think they have to hide?
Well, we know all our intelligence community said that the Russians interfered with this election. And we know that the Kremlin has done this before in Eastern Europe. And there's something called the Kremlin Playbook, a document which talks about how they do it. And part of the way they do it is they corrupt people. And we see...
Then they own them.
And then they own them. And we see Manafort and Flynn taking money from the Russians. We see Trump's son saying in 2008 that a disproportionate amount of our money is coming from Russia. The president won't release his tax return.
To what end is my question? I mean, so
to what end? Well, the Russians interfered in our election to disrupt.
Because they want to put somebody in the White House who they had some influence with, not with him, with people around him?
Or with him. I mean, if the Trump businesses are in large part financed by, it's hard to borrow money in the United States after you've gone bankrupt many times. And if your son is saying there's a lot of Russian money coming into our business, he's presumably saying because there's a lot of Russian money coming into their business. So and part of the Kremlin playbook is corrupting people, is getting their claws into them by investing in them and corrupting them. And so this will unfold. We're at a fairly early stage of this, I think.
Let me talk about the budget that they have and look at this domestic agenda. I mean, is this simply going to mean that, in fact, for this president, he's going to have a very hard time getting his domestic agenda passed because all the focus is going to be on all these investigations?
I think he's going to have a hard time getting his domestic agenda passed because this budget is pretty much dead on arrival.
But that's happened before. Budgets are dead on arrival. Then you begin to negotiate and you begin to figure out what is possible.
I understand that, but there are so many cuts and things. You're cutting Meals on Wheels. You're cutting SNAP. You're cutting food for people. You're cutting and this
Why isn't the country outraged then?
Well, there are a lot of people outraged, and I'm glad that they're outraged.
So-called resistance.
I guess so. Yeah. And there are people engaged, and I think that's great. And we need people engaged. And I'd ask that your audience become very, very engaged because this is he's not doing what he said he would do during the campaign. He said he'd never cut Medicaid. He's cutting.
And the argument is that a lot of what he promised in the campaign to the people that he helped elect him are going to be hurt a lot by the budget.
Absolutely.
Certainly in terms of whether it's the budget or whether it's the Obamacare repeal and replace.
Yeah, I'm co-chair with Pat Roberts of Kansas, Republican, of the Rural Health Caucus, and I go all over Minnesota talking to rural hospitals, small hospitals, clinics, nursing homes. People are freaked out about this health care bill because I've, in Perham, Minnesota, a woman was crying because she said, my mom will lose her home health care, and my husband and I both work, and I don't know what we're going to do with my mom.
Do you believe that if that we're looking to a 2018 election in which Democrats could take over both the House and the Senate? Is it heading that way?
I'm not a prognosticator, so I'm not going to go down that. That's not a pivot. That's just a prepared answer.
That's an invasion. There's a pivot and there's an invasion.
I don't like to do that. I like to focus on what's in front of us right now. And what's in front of us right now is this terrible health care bill that the president had this ceremony in the Rose Garden, which you don't do after the House.
It's not a mission accomplished time.
No, and the president's saying, no one knew that health care was complicated until I figured out that it's complicated. That's crazy. And we all know it's complicated. It's very complicated, and sometimes I feel that my Republican colleagues just had the Affordable Care Act, which has its flaws, which has weaknesses. They just were counting on Hillary winning again so they could just keep bashing around and didn't bother to find out how complicated it is.
I want to talk about politics. Why did she lose? Why did the man that you're looking at in the presidency today win?
I think there are a lot of reasons. He obviously appealed to people who are angry. And
why wouldn't she appeal to those people?
I believe that part of what they're angry at is the establishment, and part of what they felt was, if we just get somebody in there who hasn't been part of this,
kick butt at the establishment in the Washington crowd and drain the swamp.
Drain the swamp, and I think there was that aspect of it, but people legitimately angry. I mean, I'm talking about people who, for 40 years, have seen the middle class squeezed, and who don't see their kids having a brighter future than they had, and are angry about it. And I think that we in the Democratic Party have a different interpretation of why that has happened.
But did you make that argument clear?
I think what happened was, at a certain point, Hillary had felt that Donald Trump had disqualified himself. I think they felt they were going to win, and they started playing prevent defense. And then 11 days before, the Comey thing hit. I'm not making excuses for her. And the extent of the Russian interference in terms of 1,000 trolls in Russia sending fake stories out, and that's where fake news came from. And that going on Facebook, taking, once they hacked the DNC and they hacked Podesta, they could just put anything out there. No one has read all of Podesta's emails. No one has read everything from the DNC. So they could just send whatever lies are. And, if you're talking about was there cooperation with the Russians on that, there are some things where, Podesta's time in the barrel is very soon.
As Roger Stone said that.
Yeah.
Before the release of the
so
WikiLeaks
that's kind
stuff.
of suspicious, don't you think?
Yes, I do.
Good. I mean,
she won Minnesota 46.5% to 45%.
Right.
Minnesota. Your home state.
That's right. There are a lot of people who voted for me in 2014 who voted for Donald Trump.
Why? Because of all the things we've been seeing.
That's from the things that we're talking about. And, our job is to send the message that we are looking out for them. And I think that it helps when this president is doing things that he said he wasn't going to do, like cutting Medicaid and then giving that as a big tax cut to everybody who makes over $250,000 a year. I mean, it's this health care plan had an $880 billion cut in Medicaid and a $900 billion tax cut almost exclusively for wealthy people.
And that's the reason you want health care to precede tax reform.
Yeah, I want health care I want it on the table because right now I believe they are deliberately undercutting the markets in the Affordable Care Act, which are one of the focuses.
Deliberately undercutting those markets?
Yeah. They've been doing that for quite a while, and the unpredictability that they have created is just making those insurance companies not either want to leave the market or raise the rates, and that's the last thing we need. And so I would like to hold them responsible if that continues to happen. What I would like to happen, though, is address that. The first hearing we had in this new Congress in the Health Committee, which Lamar Alexander, whom I respect a lot, the chairman, was exactly on that, was addressing the exchanges in order to get more competition. And there are reasons that the competition has left. Part of it was the Republicans got rid of something called the risk corridors, which was would have paid insurance companies who got riskier groups. And
so it's gone to the...
I understand why you want to move on when I get into risk corridors.
No, I'm happy to give you time to talk about them all you want to.
No. I mean, very often Democratic messaging, and I say this in the book, that our problem is that all our bumper stickers end with continued on next bumper sticker. And I don't want to do that here.
Yeah. Speaking of politics, too, you said and have said that celebrity today in the political world triumphs ideology.
I actually... trumps ideology, and I didn't mean it as a pun because I used to say this before.
Yeah. What did I say? I thought I meant to
triumphs.
Say trumps. I meant trumps. Right.
Yeah,
I misspoke.
Well, maybe you have a hard time saying trumps.
No, I misspoke.
Like
you're right.
The trumps.
Yeah. Believing what? If you've got a big name recognition as a celebrity, you can win over people who simply are policy wonks.
I think I first made this observation when I used to go to Republican conventions, either for Comedy Central or for my radio show. And I go to Republican conventions and people go, "Hi, Al."
I remember that skit. Tell me about that.
Yeah. And I go, "Holy mackerel. All I do is, write books of savaging your people." And "Hi, Al." And it's
I normally vote Republican because you're funny, and I remember that great skit. I'm going to vote for you next time.
Well, I mean, believe me, I write about the '08 campaign, and everything I'd ever done in comedy was put through a $15 million machine that the Republicans built.
Looking for an attack ad.
Well, to create an attack ad, but they took everything and put it through this dehumorizer.
Right. Explain that, because you write about it several times.
Yeah, this machine was built with Israeli technology, very advanced technology, which would decontextualize anything I'd ever written. And so, in satire and comedy, you use irony, you use hyperbole, and sometimes when those things are taken out, well, I'll give you an example. So I wrote this joke, which is a very conservative joke, because it was warning parents about the internet, and you should probably monitor what your kids are doing on the internet. But I wrote the joke with some irony, and I said, the internet just is doing great things for learning. My 6th grade son did a report last year using the internet on bestiality, and he downloaded a lot of great visual aids, and the kids in the class just loved them because, at that age, they're just sponges. Okay, so you're laughing because you understand the joke. And they just did an ad where they kind of did, "Al Franken does jokes about bestiality," and it goes from infinity to through your face into the living room. And my mother-in-law cried when she saw that ad, because it was, and I was unrecognizable as her son-in-law, and it was rough, it was rugged.
Speaking of family, you have said that in that election, Franny, your wife, of 40 years, maybe?
Yeah, 41 and a half. We'll be 42 this year.
Without her, you couldn't have won the election, because she'd had some bouts, I'm trying to say this right, with alcoholism.
She's an alcoholic, recovering alcoholic. Right. Yeah, and she did not like the way I was being portrayed and she said, "I want to do an ad telling about my battle with alcoholism and how you stuck with me, because what we're seeing isn't who you are." And she did an ad with Mandy Grunwald. Mandy just talked to her, and she did a 1-minute ad, and in it she talked about, we've had problems in our marriage, and I had a problem with alcoholism, and but the line was, "How can a mother of 2 such beautiful kids be an alcoholic?" And that line spoke to the shame that mothers feel and that alcoholics feel. And there was an anchor, Esme Murphy, who's an anchor woman for WCCO, the CBS affiliate, who wrote a thing like, "Imagine this is the best political ad this year, because this ad could actually help somebody." And 2 days after the ad aired, we had a debate, and it was in a gymnasium. A lot of people there on the floor in the bleachers. When she entered that room, she got a standing ovation. And I cried when I saw the ad. Chuck Schumer cried when he saw the ad. And it was extremely... not only would I not have won, I would have lost by a lot, I think, if it hadn't been for Franny. And Franny, it's funny, because people come up to me a lot and they say, "You have a thankless job." "Thank you." And I go no, a thankless job is a job where no one thanks you. Yeah. That's what Warren Michaels once said to me. And, Franny has the thankless job, which, God, that reminds me, I should thank her at some point for making that ad, don't you think?
I do, and I don't believe you haven't thanked her 1,000 times.
Well,
have you or not?
I thanked
have
her.
you or not?
I thanked her once. I felt that was sufficient.
Why did you decide to run? I mean, you start at the top. You had no political experience. You'd been a comedian.
I didn't start at the top.
Well, next to the top.
We've seen that.
Yeah. I have seen that, yes.
Well, Paul Wellstone, who I dedicate the
progressive senator
from Minnesota, whose seat I hold, I guess. Yeah. It's also Hubert Humphrey. It's also Walter Mondale's. He was a hero of mine, and I dedicate the book to him and to his wife Sheila. And he died about less than 2 weeks before in a plane crash. He and his family and others, his daughter and wife and others in the staff and the pilot. And there were a sequence of events where there was a memorial for him that was very much about Paul. Paul had this exuberance and energy. And it was sort of, and I write about this at length in Lies and Lying Liars Who Tell Them. And that was taken by the Republicans, and they said that that there were some inappropriate things said during that, and it was used in a certain way. And so Norm Coleman ended up winning that election, and he beat Walter Mondale, who had stepped in at the last minute. And
the former vice president.
Yes. And a couple months after Coleman had taken office, he did a profile, his first profile in Roll Call, and he said, I'm a 99% improvement over Paul Wellstone.
And you read that?
I read that, and I said, who's going to beat this guy? I didn't say guy, but I said something. And I had never, ever for a second considered running for the Senate or running for office until I saw that. And, Franny and I were going to be empty nesters. And I talked to her about moving to Minnesota. And I had the Air America thing start here. I did that for
the radio show.
Yeah, the radio show in New York. But then we moved to Minnesota to do the show and to explore. And listen, I didn't necessarily think I was the guy who's going to beat Norm Coleman. And as the campaign progressed, it became less and less about Norm Coleman, and it became more and more about those who, any cafe I'd go to in small towns, anywhere, VFW Hall, American Legion Hall, you'd see, a sheet up there saying, we're having spaghetti dinner for this family because they've gone bankrupt because of a health care crisis. And Elizabeth Warren had been on my radio show telling me more than 50% of Americans go bankrupt because of a health care crisis. It's related to a health care crisis. And I knew that in my radio show, but it got personal because it was personal with the people of Minnesota. So it's a petty reason to run for the Senate to say someone's got to beat this guy. But what it became more and more about was what Paul said. Paul said that politics isn't about winning for the sake of winning. It isn't about money. Politics is about improving people's lives. And that's, I wrote this book to answer a question that I get asked more than anything else, which is being a United States Senator as much fun as working on Saturday Night Live? And the answer is no. Why would it be? Yes. But it's the best job I've ever had because I get to improve people's lives. 2 weeks in to being in the Senate, Johnny Isaacson from Georgia, I call him up. I have this idea, this bill, to match vets from Iraq and Afghanistan with invisible wounds, with PTSD, with service dogs. And he co-sponsored it and it went through and it passed. And that made me feel like I was doing something. And that's when you feel like I'm a good senator.
Makes it all worthwhile.
I
mean,
I
all
got
the
funding
slings
for
and
mental health in
all the
schools.
slings and arrows and all the dirty tricks and all of that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And the interesting thing is, you won by landslide.
I clobbered him.
You sure did.
By the smallest clobbering in history,
Well,
312 votes.
312.
Yeah.
And it took him like 6 months to decide who won.
It took him 8 months.
8 months.
Yeah, it took him 8 months. And well, we have a very thorough process in Minnesota. I won the recount in time to be seated with my colleagues, but then
they challenged.
Norm Coleman took it to court, and then we went through the process.
Whatever that might be wrong with our politics before Donald Trump, with Donald Trump, with Democrats in control of the Congress, with Republicans in control of the Congress, what's necessary to fix it?
Well, I was hoping Hillary would win so that we could have a Supreme Court that would overturn Citizens United. I think this dark money is extremely pernicious. And so, unfortunately, that didn't happen. But this big money in politics is very corrosive.
You write about the fact that when you went to the Senate, because you were known as a comedian, you had to hide those skills.
Well, I had to show the people of Minnesota that I was serious about the job, that I was going
this
to
was
be...
not a joke for you.
Yeah, well, so much of the campaign had centered on my comedy career, and again, putting it through a dehumorizer, that when I got to the Senate, Drew Lippman, my chief of staff, said, you're going to have a challenge here. You want to prove that you're going to be someone who's taking this job seriously. You have some celebrity. You have the Republicans will be suspicious of you because you've used your humor to heap scorn and ridicule on Republicans. Hillary sort of had the same parallel problems. I'm going to have you meet with Tamara Lozado, who was her chief of staff, and Hillary was a very effective senator. And so I met with Tamara, and she said, be a workhorse, not a show horse. And so that's what I did. And I tried to show, and I think I did show the people of Minnesota that I was serious, and that's why I won by a large, comfortable margin in my reelect. And so since then, it's freed me up to be a workhorse who has a sense of humor, you see.
Here's what you're speaking of sense of humor. Here's what you said about Ted Cruz. Here's the thing you have to understand about Ted Cruz. I like Ted Cruz more than most of my other colleagues like Ted Cruz. And I hate Ted Cruz.
Yes. I point to him as sort of the exception that proves the rule, which is that to get things done in the Senate, you've got to be a good colleague. You've got to, your word has to be good. You can't be toxic, a toxic coworker. He's like the guy who microwaves fish at the office. And I work a lot with my colleagues and make an effort, my Republican colleagues, and make an effort to reach across party lines to get things done that aren't partisan at all.
Take the note of the fact that you and Jeff Sessions, and now the Attorney General, are friends, and your wife.
I don't know if we're still friends, but we're friendly and I really hate what he's doing as Attorney General, and I voted against him, and I was tough on him, but I think I was fair. But his wife knitted a baby blanket for our first grandson, and also
what a big heart that is.
It was a wonderful thing to do, and I drew a map. I can draw a map of the United States freehand. I did that for Ted, for his grandson, not for Ted, for Jeff. Also, following the Hillary model, being a work for part of what Tamara said was go to every hearing, go early, stay late, have good questions, be prepared. And so I would go to these judiciary hearings that were just perfunctory nomination hearings, and there would just be Pat Leahy, the chairman, and Jeff Sessions, the ranking member, and me. And I kept coming, and Jeff was kind of going like, well, he asked good questions. And so one day Pat had to go to an appropriations thing, so he asked me to chair. So I got there early. I'm there early. I'm in the chairman's seat, and I have the gavel, and Jeff enters. He goes, well, a meteoric rise. And I said, and well-deserved. And he laughed, and it's hard for me not to like someone who laughs. I'm a comedian. So, and we, he did some things that were acts of friendship for me when Republicans on the committee would get mad at me for being too hard on one of their witnesses.
Look out for you?
A little bit, yeah. And, you can't unfairly demonize someone you're friendly with, but that's why I was
able... Don't we need more of that?
Yes, we do.
So you think in our culture and in our political culture, lying is okay now?
I guess so, because this
really
president...
pathetic if it's come to that.
It's frightening.
Yeah,
it's frightening.
Is a better word. And
calling, the mainstream media the enemy of the American people, it's... and then, saying things like Hillary Clinton had 3 to 5 million illegal immigrants vote for her. Every one of them voted for her. President Obama tapped my phones. All these things that are just not true. Just not true. And a president who doesn't seem to at all value the truth and seems to have no shame about saying things that just are factually inaccurate, provably factually inaccurate. And it's an affront to the American people.
Yeah, what was that phrase, though, that was used during the campaign? And I've forgotten. I think a columnist coined it. The notion of, the people who support him don't take him literally, but take him seriously.
Yeah.
And the other people take him literally, but not seriously.
I understand that.
And that was the argument made for those people who voted for him. I mean, somehow it was about an image of someone who's going to take and clean the swamp. And they knew that he played loose with sort of precise facts.
Yeah, it was almost as if they enjoyed that it's almost like, a movie based on a true story, but you want to elaborate the story, and it's more entertaining. And we don't, for some reason, that's not a value we have, that someone actually bothers to understand that healthcare is complicated.
I promised you more than 4 minutes or 5 minutes, which we did on the morning show. I think we've reached that point. More than 4 minutes.
Thank you. You lived up to your promise. It was good seeing you 2 days in a row.
Thank you. As well.
Yeah. What are we doing tomorrow?
Whatever you'd like. And not about politics. The book, one more time, Al Franken, Giant of the Senate, by Al Franken. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.